Unaware of the impending tempest, Black hotel owner Marcus Carter gets ejected from his own property. Without knowing the twists that would alter their lives and the system that permits such injustice to flourish, the staff decides whether he belongs there based just on his appearance. Not only will the truth change their destiny, but it will also change the fundamental basis of the discrimination they support. Even people who believe they have seen it all will be shocked by what comes next. Let's begin at the beginning, though. Like and subscribe to help combat systemic injustice and bias. We're getting closer to change with each step you take. Today, Marcus Carter was standing at his hotel's entryway. He made the decision to personally observe his employees' behavior rather than depending solely on reports. For him, staying in the shadows was essential since it gave him a better view of the situation. The hotel was immaculate. The marble floors shone, the chandeliers were sparkling, and the front desk staff was polished. However, Marcus was aware that looks were not necessarily indicative of the true circumstances. He had no obvious indications of his high rank and was dressed modestly in trousers and a blazer. Marcus may have appeared like a typical visitor to many, and that was exactly what he wanted. He had the chance to see how the employees engaged with the visitors. Despite the lobby's seeming calmness, Marcus couldn't get rid of his uneasiness. Having encountered bigotry and prejudice on numerous occasions throughout his life, he pondered whether it would occur in his own hotel. The receptionist, a young man named Thomas, didn't even look his way when he walked up to the desk. Marcus waited for a greeting as he stood in front of him, but the stillness was too lengthy. Thomas, clearly annoyed by the interruption, grudgingly raised his eyes and gave him a chilly look. He said, "Can I help you?" in a flat voice and without a grin. Marcus felt the atmosphere change instantly. It was the sensation of being evaluated based on appearance rather than merit. Despite knowing the response, Marcus remained calm and inquired about the number of rooms available. All he wanted to do was watch the response. Tomas didn't bother to thoroughly inspect the system and hardly looked at the computer screen. He turned to another employee and curtly said, "Sorry, all rooms are booked," as though Marcus had vanished. Marcus held his ground and repressed his underlying annoyance. This was nothing new. He was instantly categorized as undesirable due to his appearance and modest attire. He chose to stay and wait for the scenario to develop because he sensed this wasn't a coincidence. Marcus stayed behind the desk in spite of the unfriendly greeting. He felt a growing sense of disillusionment, but he had been treated like way before. He was interested in the extent of the prejudice of the workers. "Could you please check my reservation? I booked a room in advance." He reiterated his request, remaining composed. Tomas sighed without bothering to be courteous, obviously annoyed that the visitor had stayed. With reluctance, he started looking through the reservation. Every action and every look conveyed a message. Marcus was merely a bother that had to be eliminated. With a barely disguised sneer, Tomas tapped a few buttons idly before saying, "Sorry, I don't see your reservation here." His tone suggested that he was saying, "Get lost." Despite the stress building inside him, Marcus maintained his composure on the outside. He was aware of the common practice of making snap judgments based only on looks. Marcus wasn't going to back down, but Thomas didn't even try to hide his disdain. He politely requested that the receptionist double-check. Thomas expressed his annoyance at the request by rolling his eyes. Another employee, Elena, heard what was being said, looked at Marcus for a moment, then murmured something to Thomas and moved away. She muttered, "Maybe we should just kick him out," softly enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus felt a mixture of disappointment and rage at that statement. Such attitudes, as though his very existence was somehow undeserving, had been commonplace to him. Tomas looked back at Marcus. "I already told you we don't have any rooms for you. Maybe you should find somewhere else to stay," he grumbled. Because he was black and didn't appear like what they anticipated of a guest in such a setting, Marcus knew that his tone was so contemptuous that it had nothing to do with the hotel or the reservation. Marcus experienced a well-known spike in rage as the administrator's comments lingered in the air. It was too familiar. Realizing that this was not merely a disgruntled worker, but rather the result of a system rife with racial bias, he turned to face Thomas, who made no effort to hide his contempt. This served as a constant reminder to him that his accomplishments and prestige may be instantly obliterated due to the color of his skin. Marcus inhaled deeply, attempting to calm the inner maelstrom. At times like this, he kept thinking about what his father had said. His father didn't simply preach, he lived by the lesson he had learned at an early age. You must work twice as hard and be twice as good, because the world will always judge you by your skin, not your abilities. Marcus had learned from him that even when the system refused to grant respect, it had to be earned. However, it seemed as though all of his efforts were undervalued each time he came into circumstances such as these. Doubts started to surface. Must he fight? Would it be better to just walk away and forget about it now? Marcus, however, was aware that this was more than a mere event. This was an issue that could not be disregarded. It was more than just a dispute with employees. He would be acknowledging that this type of treatment was commonplace and could be accepted if he left now without disclosing who he really was. Marcus also considered the other hotel visitors who might have been subjected to the same torture, but lacked the means to protect themselves. His internal struggle intensified. Should he make his power known right away or wait for things to settle down a little more? He was interested in how far these individuals would go in their discriminatory actions. These ideas swiftly evolved into resolutions. He was here as the owner as well as a visitor, and this was his opportunity to learn the truth about his hotel. Marcus was aware that he could only have a significant influence on the system that permitted these kinds of events through times like this. Tomas was growing impatient as he realized Marcus would not go. He looked to Elena for encouragement. Tomas crossed his arms and spoke in a clearly irritated tone. There was no room for question in his tone when he stated, "I said there are no rooms for you. I don't know what you're not understanding, but you need to leave." This was explicitly an attempt to remove Marcus as an undesirable guest, not merely a refusal of service. The word problem hung in the air like a sentence, and Marcus could hear the subtext. They didn't want someone like him here. Elena, noticing the growing tension, moved forward and added, "Maybe we should call security. We don't have time for these kinds of problems." Marcus gazed at them both, seeming composed on the outside but feeling a mixture of disappointment and rage within. He was aware that a lot of people in his situation would have quit long ago, worn out by a system that so blatantly disregarded them. However, this was no time to give up. He made the decision to observe the situation for a little while longer in order to gauge the extent of this prejudice. Tomas gave Elena a nod, and Elena immediately called security. Two stout men in uniform showed up in the lobby within minutes. The scenario was immediately made more intense by their presence. Tall and wide, one of them approached Marcus directly without a question. "Sir, you've been asked to leave the hotel. We'll escort you out," he stated, not even making an effort to comprehend the situation. Looking at the guards, Marcus saw that things were rapidly becoming confrontational. The security personnel showed no interest in comprehending or fixing the problem. The receptionist's decision to consider this visitor undesirable was sufficient justification for them to take action. This was another instance of systemic racism, where the prejudice of one individual was blindly adopted by the others. Marcus said resolutely, suppressing his inner fury, "I'm not leaving. I have the right to be here." The boiling point was when the two guards looked at each other, and the second one added, in a harsher tone, "If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to use force." Marcus realized that the battle had come to a head and that it was time to be clean about who he really was. Seeing no reaction to their warning, the security officers proceeded. One of them grabbed Marcus by the elbow and tried to drag him out of the hotel by force. The final straw was that action. Marcus was aware that allowing himself to be pushed out would be more than just a personal setback. It would be a tacit acknowledgement that prejudice and intolerance of this kind were tolerated. The security guards exchanged bewildered glances as he swiftly freed his arm, briefly surprised, and calmly remarked, "It seems you don't know who you're dealing with." "And who might you be?" one of them asked the second guard in a sarcastic tone, sneering dismissively. At that point, Marcus produced his ID and wallet from an inner pocket, proving to them that he was the hotel's and a network of hotels owner. This surprising discovery caused Thomas, Elena, and the guards to freeze. Their expressions abruptly transformed from one of disdain and haughtiness to one of bewilderment and terror. Thomas swallowed, recognizing the seriousness of his error. Elena whispered faintly, This is a joke, right? As she stared at Marcus's ID, but there was no mistaking his look. He was the owner, and now they had no control over the situation. Marcus's voice was calm but authoritative as he said, "You've just tried to throw the hotel owner out because you judged me based on how I look." Returning the ID to his pocket, he turned to face Thomas. "You didn't even bother to check my reservation. You didn't think I could be someone important. All you saw was how I look." There was a thick quiet in the room. The guards were at a loss for words. Thomas, who was now clearly rattled, struggled to explain himself, but given the gravity of what had just transpired, all he could say was, "We didn't know." Elena, who had been standing close by, was likewise at a loss for words, unsure of how to respond to this abrupt turnabout. Marcus kept a chilly, determined gaze on them. He was aware that this was a turning point for the system that permitted such treatment as well as for himself. There was a deafening hush in the lobby. Unsure of how to escape this disaster, Thomas, Elena, and the security officers waited still. Confusion and embarrassment were visible on their faces. Marcus continued to stare at them as he sensed the tension rising. At this point, all of their self-assurance and haughtiness abruptly crumbled. Marcus stated quietly, "You didn't know, did you? You need to know who I was to show basic respect." But his statement was significant. As though their words were lodged in their throats, Elena and Thomas remained mute. They came to see that their decisions were based on their own preconceived notions about who was deserving of staying at this hotel, rather than hotel regulations. Marcus knew they already understood, so he chose to stop talking. The management of the hotel now had to face the repercussions. Realizing that the situation had escalated, the security officers started to back off in the hopes that their involvement in the incident would be forgotten. Marcus, however, faced them. The guards stood in silence, aware that their behavior was now being scrutinized. "You thought you could decide who had the right to be here based solely on appearance?" they said. The hotel manager showed up in the lobby a few minutes later, his expression tight at hearing the news. He walked over to Marcus looking quite guilty. He said in a terrified and ashamed voice, "Mr. Walker, I sincerely apologize for this incident. I can't believe this happened at our hotel." Marcus looked at him calmly. His voice was forceful as he stated, "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for change." Clearly realizing that this occurrence was about more than one isolated case, the manager nodded. It was an indication of a much more serious issue that required immediate attention. "You'll need to reconsider how your staff is trained and how they operate," Marcus said. "I won't tolerate anyone facing this kind of treatment in my hotel. This isn't the first case of bias, and if you don't change your policies, it won't be the last." Marcus nodded in agreement, but he knew deep down that words were one thing, and actual change was quite another. The manager sighed and, lowering his head slightly, said gently, "We'll review all our procedures and conduct special training for the staff. This will never happen again." He realized that the entire system that permitted these employees to believe that such behavior was acceptable needed to learn from this tragedy. Marcus walked out of the lobby and sat on a couch in the hotel's lounge after the manager's meeting. He was aware that the prejudice he had experienced was pervasive across many societal strata, and that this episode was just the tip of the iceberg. He recalled talks with his father, who had always told him, "Don't be afraid to raise your head and fight for what's right." He had heard these words all his life, and they seemed particularly applicable today. Marcus dialed his wife Amara's telephone. Her assistance had always been his most valuable asset during trying times. Her voice sounded worried as she responded. Marcus hurriedly explained what had happened to her, and she listened in silence, realizing that this was not just another workday. "Are you okay? I know you didn't just check the hotel today for no reason." "I knew you'd eventually face something like this," Amara remarked, "but I'm proud that you didn't just accept it. You decided to change the situation." Marcus felt relieved after hearing her comments. He had the courage to fight since he knew that his family would always be there for him. "You always said you wanted to create a space where other people wouldn't have to deal with what you've been through. That's been your plan from the start, not just to be successful, but to use that success to change the world around you. Today you took another step in that direction," Amara remarked. Marcus's determination was strengthened by her words. He was aware that his family's encouragement was what kept him going, when it seemed impossible to alter the system because it was so ingrained. Marcus was also aware that his behavior would affect how the hotel employees treated visitors. Not only had he shown their prejudice, but he had also taught them a lesson that would alter their perspective. Marcus thought back on the neighborhood where he was raised after speaking with Amara. His community played a significant role in his life, and his family and friends had always been there to encourage him on his path to success. He was aware that many victims of discrimination lacked the same opportunities and resources as he did. This made him more determined to fight for people who couldn't protect themselves by using his position. Marcus was reminded by this hotel encounter that there was still a lot of work to be done. His basis in the struggle for equality and justice will always be the support of his community and family. Although he was aware that there were still many obstacles to overcome, he now felt even more obligated to keep advocating for change in a system where prejudice had been the standard. Marcus got up from the sofa and surveyed the area. The whole thing had compelled him to look beyond his own life. The systematic injustice that many Black people encounter on a daily basis, whether in public places, workplaces, or hotels, has been symbolized by this case. Marcus realized that he wanted to alter the system itself, not just punish the guilty. He saw the bewildered looks that Elena and Thomas, still shocked, exchanged as they tried to figure out what to do next. Marcus came over to them. Marcus stated stoically and without raising his voice, "This wasn't just a mistake. You acted based on biased assumptions, but now you have a chance to learn something new." But his words were strong. Tomas continued to look ashamed, but Elena nodded. Although Marcus was aware that change would take time, this lesson was essential for them both. He turned to face the hotel manager, who was standing close by, and said firmly, "I expect this place to become an example for other hotels. It's not enough to conduct staff training. You must build a culture where situations like this are simply impossible. I want to see these changes, and I will personally follow up." The manager nodded, understanding that this incident was not a one-off case, but rather a reflection of deeper systemic issues that needed to be addressed at the core. The destiny of the hotel itself was at stake, in addition to his managerial reputation. Marcus realized that overcoming this problem was not the only goal he had. This had to be an example of how to treat visitors regardless of their social standing or appearance. He was aware that there were still a lot of obstacles to overcome, but this was an important first step. Making people think wasn't enough. He also wanted to alter the system that permitted these kinds of tragedies. Marcus sensed that this was more than just a personal triumph as he walked out of the hotel. He was aware that every little step he took and every conflict like this one would help him get closer to his ultimate objective, which was to establish a society in which everyone, regardless of skin color, is treated with decency and respect. This day served as a potent reminder that although the pursuit of justice is a protracted and challenging one, he was able to bring about the reforms that many others, not just himself, needed with the help of his family, community, and own willpower. Marcus left the hotel in this manner, understanding that this was only the start of a much longer path toward equality and justice.